Welcome to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics, the podcast that delves into the power of traditional cattle genetics and the ranchers bringing them back. We're returning to the tried and true practices that prioritize what truly works on the ranch. Each episode, we'll talk to ranchers who are rediscovering the methods that built strong, resilient, efficient, and fertile herds in the 1960s and 70s. These breeders are blending the best of the past with practical solutions for today's ranching world. Whether you're passionate about the future of ranching or curious about heritage genetics, this podcast is for you. Presented by Boss Sires. Tune in as we reconnect with the roots of the herd. Here's your host, Patrick Powers.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Sustainable Stock. Today we're joined by Hailey Edwards, a producer and AI technician rooted in Alaska's rugged interior. Raised on a family dairy, Hailey's journey has taken her from Holsteins to hardy beef cattle that are well suited to the extremes of the north. She now runs Shaw Creek Cattle Company and Granite Mountain Breeding Services, working with breeders across Alaska to build cattle that last regardless of climate or trends. Today, let's dig into her story and what it takes to build sustainable cattle in one of the toughest environments in the country. Hailey, thank you for making some time for us today.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm honored to be here.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I've asked you to come on today, and I think the intro does a pretty good job. You're definitely in a unique environment, and I really would just like to get that out there to the world. I'd like to understand what challenges y'all face in agriculture and, to a lesser form, cattle. I know that we speak of everything as a whole, but it's definitely not. And I would like to hear about y'all's victories and struggles from each avenue of that.
I appreciate that. Most people, when they think of Alaska, agriculture is not the first thing that comes to mind, which is understandable given what reality TV shows have done. But even my husband, who's originally from Texas, he didn't realize we had agriculture. So I'm excited to get into it today and just tell people what we're all about up here.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I think the best place to start would probably be where y'all started. I feel like maybe we could identify with your story a little better and see how it applies to the whole.
I think that's a great place to start. In 1989, my parents moved here from Wyoming. They had worked with my uncle's boys' home for a number of years, and they had cows and horses and all that. When they moved up here, the farm was an original homestead from the 1940s. The Fowlers had come up from, I believe, New Mexico area, and they survived through very, very tough circumstances, very cold winters, very long winters. And eventually they moved out of state. The patriarch and matriarch of the family out of state. Some of the children remained, but they completely left the farm. By the time my parents arrived with my three older siblings, there had been about 7 owners in between the Fowlers and my parents. And each of those owners after the Fowlers had left a pretty big mess. I believe the dairy barn was present. I believe most of the buildings currently standing were here. But when my folks got here, the entire property was condemned by the state of Alaska, including the hay sheds, which, why would you condemn a hay shed? I don't know, but they did. So my parents had quite a task before them to clean up the property, get electricity running to it, get running water, and it was something that took quite a while. In the midst of all that, they started a dairy farm called Shaw Creek Meadows, and they started with about 20 Holsteins that they brought up from Montana, and then that eventually grew to about 100 cows, including calves, steers, and the milking cattle. In 2000, there were quite a few dairies around the state, from Delta Junction to Palmer, with the majority of them being in Delta Junction, where I currently live. And in 2000, political machinations, you could say, ended up completely collapsing 99% of the dairies in the state, including my own parents.
Oh, wow.
It just wasn't Yeah, it just wasn't profitable at the time. So they ended up transitioning into beef cattle. We were able to rent bulls from Northwest Land and Livestock, and they primarily have Galloway Angus cross cattle. In the meantime, as far as the business ventures went, my folks went into probably some more traditional jobs. My father owns a septic company, and my mother has a security contract.
So y'all had to go off farm to maintain y'all's presence there.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, I don't know how much more in depth you'd like to go on that, but that's fairly interesting that the entire market collapsed there. Do you feel like that portion of the country was ready to adapt to changing their beef market from dairy to meat, or do you feel like that was a struggle?
I feel like that was a struggle, and a lot of the dairy farmers at the time either don't live in Delta anymore or they just completely quit farming. They may have a couple of beef cows around, but it wasn't a it wasn't an easy shift from correction. It wasn't a seamless shift from dairy to beef. And in fact, most of the beef producers around here didn't start out as dairy farmers.
Okay, so y'all are in a very unique position for y'all's ability to just roll with the punches there.
Yes. Yep. If there's one thing that we are good at, it is pivoting.
That's wonderful. Well, of course, I do a little scroll on everybody's Facebook or consume as much as I can before I have a guest on. I've noticed that you have a lot of ties to 4-H, FFA, and I was wondering if you could speak on how that's influenced you and maybe the mindset of agriculture in Alaska.
I think that's a great place to go. The 4-H presence in Alaska is quite large. In comparison to FFA, I'd say FFA is starting to grow more and more, but 4-H definitely has a very strong presence. Um, as far as my 4-H experience, I raised some market steers. I struggled through market steers, and I can get into that a little bit more. But my primary focus at the time was with horses, and we had a very strong more horse-based 4-H club. There were several kids that did do market livestock, but the difficult thing about that was it was hard to get business owners to come to the auctions, even when you explain like you don't have to buy an animal, just being there supporting that's all we're asking for.
Yeah.
The attitude for a lot of people was that you come to our auction to cheap meat, which is really unfortunate. I mean, I understand that people have to, you know, it doesn't pencil out to buy, a $5,000 steer, but there's other benefits to it too. So growing up, that was kind of the attitude that we faced around 4-H. And FFA at the time didn't have a very strong livestock focus. Gosh, I think when I was growing up, I think there was only 8 chapters in the whole state.
Oh wow. You made a funny point there. Nobody raises an eyebrow when that box of Girl Scout cookies in front of the Target is $18
Mm-hmm.
because you're fine with whatever it's supporting. But it's funny how that mindset can break when it's wrapped around livestock. You don't. These people just seem to have a disconnect on what they are inspiring and carrying on to another generation when they do spend a little out of their comfort zone on that getting away from that market production pig, cow, sheep, lamb, and meeting the child that reared that animal. They don't seem to realize what they can further by spending that extra dollar.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. And the crazy thing is, you go about 100 miles north of us, and you'll find turkeys going for $2,000, which is
for
crazy to me.
for a turkey.
But it's yeah, a market turkey. So yeah, it definitely depends on where you're at. But yeah, the attitude can can be vastly different.
Well, before we go any further with the attitude of agriculture in Alaska, because I really do want to dive into that a little further with you, I would like you to carry on about what struggles you did face with your market steers. And I'm wondering if they were unique to your environment or just you as an individual.
So the struggles that I faced with market steers were primarily breed based. At a certain point, we brought in Scottish Highland cattle, which this is no hate to Scottish Highland cattle. I think they're great. However, when you're trying to grow a market steer in about a span of a year, you want something that can grow a bit faster on grain. And I mean, they're not bred for being, for gaining a lot of weight on grain. So it makes sense. So getting a market steer up to the weight, which minimum was 1,000 pounds, that was the biggest struggle I had. When I went with more of the Galloway Angus base, then I got a quicker return.
That's funny, Haley. You found your way into some adapted genetics for grazing potential, and they failed you because you needed to keep up with the market pace. Where
Hmm.
the majority of the people we speak to are celebrating that same thing you faced and called a problem at that
Yeah.
point in your life. That's funny.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, I mean, it just goes to show that every cow has its place, and that cow that you intended for that market, it just wasn't built for that time span you had to work within.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, pivoting on that, what is the culture around agriculture in Alaska? You touched on that a little, and I said that we wanted to get back to that. Do you feel that it's an integral part that the average Alaskan has a relationship with what hits their plate, or do you feel there's the same disconnect that is in a good portion of the world?
I would say there's a good disconnect still. So prior to COVID, a lot of people didn't think it was necessary, including on the state level. You could pretty much count on the grocery trucks getting through Canada on time. The aisles would be full, et cetera, et cetera. There was a false sense of security. And when COVID hit, and suddenly there were a lot of aisles that were empty for a lot longer, people started to just straight up panic. And all of a sudden, everybody freaked out and everybody wanted to be a farmer. And then about 6 months later, realized this is really hard. How about I just support the farmers?
I don't know if you've heard one of my latest interviews with PJ Butler, but he reflected on that there needs to be a dramatic shift in the view of agriculture because farmers are heroes, and these producers truly are. It's the 2% feeding the 98%. And
Yeah.
I think COVID was really, as much as a negative time for our world, it really was a positive coming out of it for agriculture because I feel like there was a level of respect finally given for the farmer.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I think that some people decided it was time for themselves to give it a shot, and they realized just how hard it was and just how little margin there was on everything.
Hmm.
And I think that might be part of what's helping our world and bringing us to the forefront of culture.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I heard stories of people buying chicks, for instance, from hatcheries, and the chicks would come in, they'd pick the chicks up, they'd call the hatchery saying, "What do I do now?" It's like, maybe you look that up, you research that prior to getting into it, but it was just that panic of, I need to do this now, and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, that's a good point there. I mean, people obviously felt that calling, but there wasn't a system of support there because it's been such an ignored portion of our economy for so long.
Hmm.
And then the systems that were in place, such as 4-H and agriculture, we've already touched on the fact that people weren't willing to give the support there either. So when it comes time to needing those resources and education, it wasn't there any longer either because it's been so forgotten.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. People are finally waking up.
I do have a question. Is there an infrastructure of buyers, feedlots, marketplaces, anything like that in Alaska set up to where cattle can just ramp up? Or are we building this from the ground up there?
We are absolutely building this from the ground up. So from my understanding, most cattle, they go through a cycle. They start at the cow calf lot, you know, their calves are born, raised, etc. Then the calves move on to the backgrounders or stalkers, or they live there for a couple months. And then for the finishing stage, they go on to the feedlot. We don't have that. Essentially, what we have is vertical integration, which from what I have seen, that ends up raising the cost of the beef because you're not moving the cattle along. You have more investment for a longer time than most people would, I say. We don't have cattle auctions. There are no big meat packing plants purchasing cattle, and nearly all meat is sold direct to consumer and has been even prior to the COVID shift. However, prior to the COVID shift, again, most people didn't care, didn't think it was needed, what have you. So there's still, since COVID, uh, since we're in post-COVID culture now, we're still building infrastructure from the ground up. And some of the infrastructure just requires higher cattle numbers, period, in order for it to be sustained. And we definitely don't have that yet.
Okay, that was my next question. What do you feel the major barriers of that are?
I think not having, uh, well, not having many market outlets. Currently in the state, there are 2 or 3 meat plants. I could be two for sure. There's some other smaller meat plants, and they're seeing much more utilization from outside people.
Okay.
So, for instance, Delta Meat and Sausage in town here, they are a USDA certified meat plant, and they're having beef producers like myself taking our beef to them, and they're packaging it up, and then we sell it. But still, even with more cattle producers, more beef producers, there's still a huge disconnect between the consumer and the beef producer. Even though lots of us, we have websites, we're on Facebook, we're paying for ads and marketing and trying to get in person as much as possible, there's still a very big.
So cost and distance are also barriers y'all are having to face, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. Where I'm located, I am 100 miles from the nearest Walmart and about 300 miles from the closest Target,
My mother
which
could
I
not
know for
live in that
some,
world.
a lot of people can't. A lot of people can't. Yeah, and the climate is so much different from one part of the state to the other. For instance, where I'm at in the interior of Alaska, we can get up to 90 degrees in the summer and negative 60 below in the wintertime.
Oh, wow.
So so I'm sure we'll get into this more, but you have to have cattle that can adapt to that. And the changes happen very, very quickly. Now you go down to the Kenai Peninsula in Homer, Soldotna. Generally, they don't get below 10 degrees above zero, but they're much more temperate in the summertime, and they are a lot more humid, wet, just because they're by the coast. So you have to have cattle that can also adapt to that well.
Okay, so you have a lot of different adaptation needed just to suit every little sector of Alaska.
Yeah.
I feel like we've touched on a lot of the negatives of your isolation and marketplace, but do you feel there are some positives that you would like to highlight as well?
Absolutely. We definitely have fewer transferable diseases to deal with. We're not having outbreaks of BVD or, the other common diseases. We also don't have many cattle. We don't have a lot of cattle movement. Uh, in the times that I've been in the lower 48 in Texas, it's pretty common to see trailer loads of cattle just running through town. If you see that in Alaska, most likely it's the meat plant picking up the market show animals and taking them from the fair to the meat plant. So it's not you don't have to worry about, more vet checks, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And we also have influence from show cattle in the commercial world. If you, for instance, going back to 4-H, if you go to a 4-H livestock market in Fairbanks, for instance, you're going to see steers that reflect the commercial side. They look like normal steers, at least what I consider a normal steer. They aren't, they have shape to them. They aren't just a round, fat creature that every time he takes a step, he jiggles. He looks, how do I put this? He doesn't look like a show poodle.
Yeah, your judges are rewarding your locally adapted genetics. They're not rewarding mainstream hot trendy things. They're putting a gold star on the head of the cow that managed to make it through this tough winter and managed to make it on the limited forage and still shined through and had good production and forage conversion and
Mm-hmm.
and natural traits.
Yep.
Did I catch that well enough?
Nope. You captured that very well.
Okay. Well, that's something that we as a whole are getting ready to start try and push more. Yeah, I feel like we need to start rewarding the judges that reward natural adaptability and function.
Absolutely. I think that's something PD mentioned.
Yeah, PJ did touch on that a little
PJ.
bit, and I'm glad you touched on what PJ said there. I really feel like of everyone I've spoke to, he did a really good job of encapsulating the idea of what food security in the cattle market could be. And I feel like our conversation earlier of this post-COVID environment and this value that's been added to the world of agriculture, that maybe y'all are being viewed in a different light along those same lines that he highlighted.
Yeah, absolutely. We're being viewed as more, what was the COVID word? Essential. We're
Yes,
being
it's
viewed as
essential
essential
employees.
workers, essential
Yes.
employees. And when you understand that Alaska imports 95% of our food, which is
Oh, wow.
crazy.
I
So
did not realize y'all were at that level.
yeah, we import, and probably 95% is being generous. I wouldn't be surprised if we were closer to 98%. So
Really?
that's when food security becomes huge because according to the numbers I looked at recently, we only have enough food to support all of Alaska for about 10 days. And we have a population of 700,000, which isn't a lot, but you would think, given the food security of other states that have millions of people, that those are huge numbers. So we've definitely become more essential in the eyes of the people and in the state.
Okay. Well, Miss Haley, I think leading off of that, if should someone be waking up to the idea of wanting to create this food security for their state, their region, I feel like y'all's example of y'all's transfer from dairy to beef. If we could speak on that, what kind of timetable did y'all have there and how hard was that transition? So if somebody's waking up and they're going to try and transition their property or just starting an operation, what time scale could they be looking at to be where you're roughly at?
That's a great point to jump into. So from the time we decided to actually start selling beef to where we had beef, it took us 30 months before we had a product to sell. And part of that reason was we had 2 very bad hay years, and we were buying a lot of hay because we raise our own hay. But when you have
Okay.
either it's too dry or it's too wet, or you have the wet and the dry at the wrong times, that makes for a very, very poor hay crop.
Yeah, well, how short is y'all's growing season for hay? I mean, if we're going to paint y'all in this light, let's at least give the listener the full understanding that y'all don't have 6 months of summer to grow a hay. Y'all don't have that hay season.
No, we might get two cuttings. Two cuttings we're
Really?
pretty happy with, and that's in roughly a 3-month period, depending on the year. Sometimes we get a little longer, sometimes we get a little shorter. My folks have told stories of when they have put hay up in the snow because it snowed in September and they still have hay.
Yeah. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Did I?
Yeah, I lost you at. My parents have told stories of putting up hay in the snow because it snowed in September.
Okay, yep. So that was part of the issue is we just had 2 bad hay years. And then this last year we had a much better hay year. We're able to put some more weight on the steers, and I was getting spent brewer's grain from the local brewery at that time. So that helped finally get us to the finish line. But 30 months is a long time. Generally, in the lower 48, steers are hitting the market at about 18 to 24 months old. So, yeah, we were way over that.
Yeah, you discussed the long-term investment earlier and how it was a little bit off par. I can only imagine that working with numbers like that, it truly is long-term in the cattle operation there in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
You have far less growing window for your forage, so it would naturally mean a longer grow out period for your cattle to me, in my mind.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right.
So it would be hard to scale everything. I mean, if your wish came true and tomorrow, boom, you wake up and everything related to cattle and cattle production falls there, it would still have to adapt to a mindset of almost taking twice as long, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is definitely a unique position you have, and I've never even thought on that.
Yeah, and most people don't. I mean, again, agriculture hasn't really been a forefront for anybody's attention. So, yeah, I don't know of anywhere else in the United States that has to take that long for a lot of reasons. If South Dakota doesn't have a good hay year, they can drive to Nebraska or Kansas or even Texas and be back in a couple days. We have to go to Canada if the whole state is in trouble.
That's crazy. I mean, that is absolutely wild. I've never considered that.
Mhm.
Well, do you feel like now would be a good time to transition into your work in AI? I'm very curious to what brought you to that, and if you benefited as an individual from it, or do you feel like you did that for the community as a whole?
So I started AIing because I wanted to improve our own beef quality. Like I said earlier, we don't have much in the way of cattle population, and it doesn't take long for the family tree to turn into a Christmas wreath. So being able to bring in new genetics is huge. Trying trying to bring in live cattle from the lower 48 or even through Canada is a mind-numbing experience. You have to deal with the quarantines and vaccines and EID tags and just the cost. I mean, to get a decent cow, you're probably looking at 3 grand, and then you're looking
Oh
at
wow,
another 3 to 4 grand just to bring her up here. And that's assuming you're starting from Montana, Oregon, those northern states. So imagine you're trying to bring 10 cows up, the expense it just increases exponentially.
that's an excellent point. I mean, one of my previous conversations was with Renee Strickland, and I never considered the cost of the import of cattle, and the information beautifully co-aligns with the fact that I never expected the amount of import y'all do for your
Mm-hmm.
foodstuffs. So why would cattle genetics not be equivalent in that cost as if y'all were a foreign country?
Yeah, exactly. And I know we've talked about that before, that in some ways we're a developing state.
Yes. So you spoke a little bit about what inspired you to get into AI was your personal benefit. and your ability to get your hands on some stuff at a far more affordable rate and introduce new, better genetics. But I wondered if you could dive into how it works. What is the step by step? Do you get your hands on a catalog and think, "Ooh, I need that," or "Ooh, that will do well here," or are you looking for certain things?
So when I first started, I put a lot of stock into EPDs, which are expected progeny differences, and I didn't really learn about Bonsma until after I started AIing. I didn't look at what I personally wanted until after the first herd that I'd AI'd. But current now, I looking at a catalog. I'm looking for, is the bull masculine? Does he look like a steer? Does he look like a bull? And then once I've gotten through the physical characteristics, including conformation, does he have an angle to his hocks or is he straight hocked? Then I would start looking at the EPDs, mainly focusing on scrotal circumference and then the maternal traits, given that that is typically what needs the most improvement. And I think PJ brought up a good point is when choosing bulls based on EPDs, you want something that's moderate. You don't want, flyers that are super high on one thing or super low on another. And I will say in the beginning, I didn't do such a great job at that. The other part is that EPDs change regularly. So the numbers can change, the accuracy can change. You can have a bull that goes from, an average of 69, adding 6 pounds birth weight to 10 pounds or 3 pounds. So you're also dealing with that. So now, especially since I've reevaluated the bulls that I have in my stock, I'm actually looking more at where are they from? What kind are they more suited for the feedlot or are they more grazing based?
So you're getting into the environmental adaptability of it.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, in my experience and in rereading through Bonsma's Wortham lectures, nearly any animal can adapt to the cold so long as they are well fed because of that energy need. I don't know how far that extends to the Bos indicus type cattle, meaning the Brahmin or Gyr. There's not enough animals to draw, yes, this applies to all species of cattle, but I can say that any of the British breeds have done very well up here. And having gotten semen from bulls from Texas and Missouri, my calves have done very well despite, you know, the straws coming from the southern United States.
I kind of like that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
Just because I can get my hands on this and it looks very promising, there might be other factors there that I really need to consider.
Yep.
Maybe I should buy something, even if it's not as good on paper, that matches my environment a little greater. And within a shorter span of time, I can feel the benefit of those new genetics.
Yep, exactly.
Rather than something new to the area spending all its energy just coming up to snuff.
Mm-hmm.
I like that line of thinking.
And I think that becomes a bigger problem when you're bringing live cattle from out of state up to Alaska. I don't see it aside from like the Bosicus, and again, I don't have enough data to draw a conclusion on that. But as far as bringing in genetics from Texas, I don't, and, breeding them to my adapted cattle, I don't see that as big of an issue. But then again, you could hit a really bad streak or you could hit a really good streak.
So, what do you feel your clients are looking for the most? We've gone over your work with your family's Shaw Creek Cattle Company, but let's get a little more into Granite Mountain breeding and what you as an AI tech offer your clients.
Absolutely. What I offer through Granite Mountain Breeding Services is obviously the AI portion, the artificial insemination. I also have semen sales and semen storage, but a role that I've come into more recently that I didn't expect was consulting. Because like I said earlier, I believe, is a majority of the customers I'm dealing with are those with 1 or 2 cows, and they're often newer to cattle ownership. And I'm doing my best to give them resources to help them succeed. A lot of these
Okay.
cows, we're also troubleshooting a lot of issues with some of these cows. Some of them they have had cows prior, but there was a gap, and it's not really sure last time she was in with a bull if she took, if she didn't, because they didn't have access to pregnancy checking. A lot of these people don't have access to pregnancy checking technology,
Okay.
so it's there's a lot of muddy waters there.
So you
And
turned into an investigator as well, huh?
yeah, absolutely. Let's just see if this will work. And after having looked through notes, previous notes in preparation for this, I'm getting to the point where I will likely start telling some people, if you're not sure if cow can take to a bull, the likelihood of her being able to take AI is very low. So let's see if we can find you a live bull that you can breed your cow to that we also know has calves on the ground. This bull has sired calves, and just see if let's try to problem solve this a bit.
That's beautiful. So you're coming at it with a conscience, where most would just be pushing the sale. You truly are offering a level of consulting, and you're entering the conversation with a conscience.
Absolutely. And I certainly try to. I don't think it is right to. I'm not the kind of person who's just going to put a sale. I know how much these guys are investing. It's a lot of money that they're investing into this, and at the end of the day, I need to set them up for success as much as I can. And if that means pointing them to a live bull, then that's what I have to do. Ultimately, we all benefit. It's not a competition here.
Yeah. Well, what challenges do you feel you're facing as an AI technician?
One of the challenges is distance. I'm also a mobile AI tech, so I'm traveling. Well, here in a month, I'm going to be traveling to the Kenai Peninsula to AI a couple cows, and that's a 1,000-mile round trip for me.
Oh,
I,
wow.
I don't know if any other AI techs are traveling that far, but that's I'm pretty sure I'm traveling about the furthest. Um, and getting timing right as far as scheduling people out, because if I'm just doing one or two one or two people and 1 or 2
It's not
cows,
cost effective.
that's no, it's not. And that's something I'm still working through and trying to workshop.
So you would say that you're struggling with finding that balance of enough customers along a single route to make it affordable for everyone and still pass that cost savings on and still arrive at the benefits that AI have to offer rather than the distance and all those other factors just pricing it all the way out.
Absolutely. And with that, the other side of it is AI is not a it's not a short time investment. Everything that I have read, everything I have found is if you're going to start using AI, it's going to be at least a 5-year project, because you're
Really.
dealing with a lot of different individuals, you're dealing with a lot of different timing, and you're trying to workshop a lot of things. There's a lot that goes into having a successful AI pregnancy with just a hormonally balanced cow. When you have a normally healthy cow, there's still so many other steps that it takes to get to that point. So, so then again, with the cost effectiveness, a lot of people look at it like, well, is it really cost effective if for me to spend 5 years and I'm not getting a result? And having 1 or 2 cows, that's also a challenge, because generally the success rate is 50-50. And with larger herds, you can spread that you're more likely to get something out of a larger herd. If you have one or two cows, it's make it or break it.
Yeah.
So again, with that cost effectiveness, I'm dealing with different challenges, and I'm having to learn how to overcome them or pivot to a new approach.
Yeah. And you're trying not to allow your customer to have to absorb too much cost or or mitigate that just because they started with a bad foundation, huh?
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely unique. I've never considered that travel could have that much influence and the need to start with a strong base. I imagine it does heavily influence your work.
Yeah.
Miss Hailey, before we leave our conversation on AI and your work along with it through Granite Mountain, I feel like it would be amiss if I didn't ask how you feel boss sires and your relationship with boss sires could benefit Alaska.
That's a great question, and I think how both sires can help Alaskans is by obviously genetics that can thrive in Alaska, and more specifically into that, genetics that can thrive on um, thriftier genetics that can thrive on less input. I think, like I've mentioned before, we don't have a corn belt, we don't have cheap grain. There's a lot of costs and inputs that go into raising beef up here, and having thriftier animals, and not just a Scottish Highlander, but your more, you know, Galloway, Angus, Charolais, your British, European breeds that can thrive on our grass up here,
Yeah.
that can focus on the more regenerative agriculture side.
Yeah, work in part with the land.
Yeah, exactly. That can work with the land instead of needing a lot of inputs. And I know a lot of your other hosts, or excuse me, your other guests have mentioned that before too, but it really rings true. It's not fair to the producers here to sell them genetics that have to live just to thrive. It's not fair, to the newcomers. It's not fair to the large producers.
It's not fair to the cattle too. People often forget that. And when we consider these level of inputs, a lot of people tend to forget the fact that you're having to feed your way into fertility, and that's been such a concept that's been accepted for so long. Can you imagine if it came along to a point in your life, okay, I'm ready to be a mother, I'm ready to do this, and all you need to do is completely shift your natural environment, and we can get you there. Well, why didn't I have the capability of entering this new stage of life in a natural way? Does that say more about the situation as a whole? And we just glaze over that and forget it.
Absolutely. You're right. It's not fair to them.
Well, Miss Hailey, unless there's anything more you'd like to say there, I jokingly made the comment earlier that we wake up tomorrow and all of our dreams come true, and Alaska has all this infrastructure. And you and I both notated that there would have to be a grasp that everything would just take a little longer in an Alaskan growth environment. But to nail that down a little further, what are your hopes in general for Alaska's ag future over the next 20 years, say?
That's a great question. And my hopes for Alaskan agriculture, I hope to see not only the breeders be able to scale their business, but I am also hoping to see new people come into the industry and and bring their new ideas, bring their experiences without without
Preconceived notions.
preconceived notions. That's a good way to put it. Uh, Kind of jumping back to currently, we will end up with new people coming to the state from Iowa and Texas and states with a big ag influence, thinking that they're going to teach Alaskans how to farm. And make no mistake, I have no issue with people bringing new ideas, but they'll show up and they'll have loads and loads of capital, and you know blow it all on the fancy infrastructure, on, cattle, all that. And then in a couple years, they're gone because they tried to outbuy the learning curve, and you cannot outbuy a learning curve. They didn't take the time to learn about Alaska, to learn about the culture here and what needs to happen. And with that, in the next 20 years, I would like to see the attitude shift.
I love that. I really do like that. I think that is going to be something that sticks with me from this conversation is you can't outbuy a learning curve. And I think that could apply to so many different facets of the world of agriculture.
Hmm.
You can't outbuy the degradation of your land through ill practices with your cattle. You can't outbuy poor genetics if you're trying to adapt them to these new systems. That is truly beautiful, Miss Hailey.
Thank you. Came up with it myself. Um, so for the next, and so with all that, in the next 20 years, I'd like to see Alaska be able to support itself and and the people in agriculture better. Right now, it's kind of like trying to nail Jello to a wall. A lot of people are scrambling and trying to find a quick solution, and there isn't a quick solution. It's something that
Yeah.
takes time, but it's kind of hard to pin down what I would like to see for Alaska's future, but mainly being able for the producers to scale their businesses and provide the consumers with high quality beef and not have the exorbitant price tag on it.
Well, it sounds a lot like your future for agriculture in Alaska is agriculture in Alaska.
Yeah, trying to export it is, I don't see much future trying to export our ag since everybody can get it outside their front door. But yeah, I want to see a greater connection between the consumer and the producer. And I think that how we do that is through smaller producers, the ones
Yeah.
that are raising in their backyard, that are doing the best with what they have.
I like that. I think that the overarching summary of your message would be a greater relationship between the consumer and the agricultural professionals and the experience. If
Mhm.
think about the amount y'all import, 95% you stated earlier, how much could that come down with just turning loose of a couple extra dollars and the forming of a relationship with the producers?
Honestly, I don't have a number for that. I genuinely don't know. Uh,
But we do have a hope for that.
I do have a hope for that. I'd like to see us 25%, and that's still not enough, but I think 25% it'd be a huge increase. It'd be 20% more than we used to. That
Yeah.
doesn't sound like a very hopeful number, does it? Again, numbers are kind of hard to pin down here because things change so quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and look how small your population is too.
Yeah, we're so small that it's hard to have a picture of where the beef industry is going here. I guess right now I'd say we're just kind of we're chugging along. Um,
Yeah. I think that is great, though. I mean, there's not many states that have an opportunity for a dramatic shift like Alaska, though, because your
mhm,
population is so strong and y'all don't so small, and y'all currently don't have a infrastructure that supports and prioritizes Alaskan agriculture. If there was a shift in y'all's demographic, population, and investment strategy by these newcomers, it could change overnight fundamentally.
right. And even having people that have experience with the infrastructure that say Texas has, because there's a lot of people here that have no idea what the infrastructure is in the lower 48. And I don't know it, but you kind of have to have a little bit of knowledge on what infrastructure is needed before you can start to build it.
Well, I mean, you're right, and it takes a unique individual to want to make that move up there. I don't fully even have a grasp for it here, and I live in Texas. I'm an hour outside of Houston. We host the world's largest rodeo every year, and I have 3 sale barns within an hour drive from my home.
Mm-hmm.
and I have 50 private meat markets, and with minimal cost difference, I could choose for every cut of meat my family consumes. Now, granted, we consume our own beef for the majority, but I have the option, affordable option, of every cut of beef we consume being from individual to individual without the hand of a corporation ever touching it.
Yep.
And I feel like we're blessed for that, and we take that for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we don't have that up here.
Yeah,
For a whole beef, you're looking at about average of $5,000 for a whole beef. A 1,200-pound animal, that's what you're looking at. And I think I saw recently somebody was selling 1,200-pound steer for $1,500 for the whole beef.
that's wild.
Yep.
Well, Miss Hailey, I have a greater question I like to ask all my guests, and I know you've heard me say it because you've listened to a couple of my podcasts now. So I hope you're ready for it because it's a big one. In
Okay.
your view, what is the moral obligation of the cattlemen to the land, the industry, and future generations?
Well, I think Dr. Bonsma put it really, really succinctly is it's the duty of the Western and Christian man to improve that which has been given to us. And I really feel that the Lord has given me a responsibility to improve our land and to improve my relationship with how the land supports us and how I can support it. I think, you know, improving the livestock has been something that the Lord's also put on my heart. And I think when we can do that, when we can improve the land and the livestock, we set the future generations up for further success and by teaching them how to continue what we've started. And I think that's really the moral obligation we have to, like you said, the land, the industry, and future generations. If we only care about, you know, where we can get the next dollar from, that sets up future generations for failure. That sets the land up for failure. And ultimately, agriculture as we know it collapses.
That's very well said. I love that you're willing to speak on your faith being a guiding principle, and I've never heard that quote from Bonsma, and I really do like that.
Absolutely.
Well, Miss Hailey, do you feel there's anything that we haven't touched on that the listener would really be missing out on if we didn't get the opportunity to speak on it?
I think ultimately, I want people to take a breather, take a minute. This is something that's going to take time, whether the beef business, whether it's bringing new genetics, whether it's figuring out what genetics you need. It's not the end of the world if you don't get it done tomorrow. When you look at the other breeder that has 1,000 head of cows, most likely started at just one or two. You can't build Rome overnight.
Very well said. No, nobody starts at the finish line, and neither should you.
Yeah.
And respect that time spent, and that really harkens back well to your earlier statement that stuck with me, that you can't outbuy a learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
If you are willing to respect the time investment and understand that it's going to be there no matter your budget, no matter your geographic location, there's going to be a time investment on your part to gain the respect and knowledge that it takes to truly be a cattleman and a person in agriculture. If you can have that mindset going into it, you will flourish at a greater rate than you ever could by rushing it.
Absolutely. You summed that up really, really well.
I like that. Well, Miss Hailey, I really do appreciate your time and being willing to come on and speak in the manner you have, and really give us all a good understanding of the unique challenges you and your market face. And I hope that the listeners find it as interesting as I have.
Well, I appreciate you having me on to talk about this. Not many people, like I said, understand what agriculture is about in Alaska, that we have agriculture. And I'm hopeful that both sides can help Alaskan cattlemen survive and thrive for the next through the next several decades. I'm really looking forward to the partnership, and I can't wait to see what we can do.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you all for listening, and a big thanks to Hailey for coming on and sharing her story today. If you'd like to connect with Hailey and Granite Mountain Breeding Services, you can find her links in the podcast description. As always, we'll list everything she's got, Facebook, YouTube, any of her website or anything like that. And to everybody out there, as always, don't forget to
Ranch with purpose and breed for the future.
Thank you for tuning in to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share. Join us next time as we continue exploring the legacy and future of cattle ranching. For more information, visit us at bosssires.com. That's BOSSIRES.com. Or connect with us on Facebook. Until then, stay rooted in common sense and connected to the herd.